a look at some of the prospects who were waived, demoted, sent down, all that good stuff, including a focus on Andrew Cristall. And then we'll end things off with the game on the line segment for the 2016 NHL draft, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi joined by Sebastian and Hadi, and on today's episode, we'll be breaking down some of the prospects who were put on waivers or sent down or demoted overall throughout the NHL and kind of evaluate what went wrong or what went right there, what's good for their development, etc. Including a focus in our second segment on Andrew Cristall. The recent second-round pick of the Washington Capitals was very high up on both of our boards. He was sent down to Kelowna as well. We'll kind of look at his season expectations, what to expect from him, and how that's going to go from him. And then we'll end things off with our game on the line segment for the 2016 NHL draft, where we pick a player from a different round, 6 players from a different round in the 2016 draft and build a starting 6, 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and a goalie in order to win a Game 7 Stanley Cup final. Before we get into any of that, just make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very much appreciated. So let's get right into it here with a couple of waiver wire submissions here from 2 different teams for prospects who were decently highly touted but just haven't developed the way that we thought we would. Let's start with Lassi Thompson of the Ottawa Senators. Talk me through a bit of what we expected from Thompson in his draft year and what went wrong, particularly in his development, that led him to eventually be a waiver submission in this offseason here.
Yeah, I mean, Thompson was drafted as a two-way defenseman in 2019, and his game, I guess, never quite took off at the NHL level because he lacks a standout tool to really propel him into that role and to make him a player that is impossible to sit. He had this label as a two-way defenseman, never quite outgrew that, and never quite found his overall identity as a player or the tools that he has that could really cement his spot in an NHL lineup. Mm-hmm. And despite developing well in terms of refining particular tools, like I think his passing has improved a fair amount since his draft year. I think his scanning habits have gotten a fair amount better, but he lacks that standout tool that really forces a coach to put a player into the lineup. And especially for a team that's now entering its contention window, they can't just have a full roster spot dedicated to a player that's a maybe and who isn't forcing their hand. So I can see why Thompson was waived. I don't really expect him to get claimed either at this point in time. I mean, he's 23 years old now, has 18 NHL games under his belt. That's not the biggest repertoire anymore. Like a first round draft pick like 5 years ago doesn't quite outweigh that. And so I can see why it happened, but I think it's the story of that's similar to many other prospects throughout hockey history and sports history in general, where you get to a certain level and then at a certain point you just don't quite have the tools to make it work, or the game breaking elements in your game to make it work past a certain point. And it seems to me like Thompson's kind of hit that wall now.
Absolutely. There's 2 major issues that we usually see with prospects. Either they're too generalists, so they don't have any standout tool and can't really impact the game in any particular way. It can be something as simple as skating or puck retrievals or, scanning habits. Just at least one thing that you're better at than most will usually help you at the NHL level. But there's none of that in Thompson's game, and that's what's kind of preventing him from becoming that high-end player that we thought he'd be, and that led to him being picked top 20 in the 2018 NHL draft. I mean, it's just, with hindsight, you look at it and you can kind of see why that is. I mean, he's never been the best skater, never been the most elusive player on the puck. He's never been particularly exceptional defensively. He's just always been more developed than his surroundings. more developed than his age group, and that's carried him a certain way. But with hindsight, you can kind of see why that happened. But it's kind of the opposite with Ty Smith, who was also
Yeah.
put on waivers recently, where Ty Smith is too much of a specialist and lacks strongly in the areas that you need a player of his position to kind of have. So he was a first round pick in the 2018 NHL draft, and what really stood him apart was his offensive game and his skating. And those have remained strengths of his, but just the surrounding tools are not good enough for him to be a top four presence. And when you're an offensive defenseman and you're not playing in the top four more often than not, if you're not good defensively at all, you're a liability in your own zone. It's really going to harm your NHL prospects. So, you're looking at a player like him, and you can understand why a team would not be interested in retaining him, because he's gone from team to team, and every step of the way he's been behind the curve defensively. And although he's really good offensively and really good in terms of his skating ability, it's nowhere near the level that would justify him being that bad defensively. It's the same issue we saw with Tony DeAngelo, with Victor Mete, but Tony DeAngelo at least had that high-end offensive ability, whereas Ty Smith is really good offensively, but not to that level. So it's just, he's the type of player that you would expect the team to drop, right? I mean, is there any other reason you can see in terms of why it hasn't panned out in this game? Does he lack scanning ability? Does he lack kind of high-end hockey sense? Because from what I see, it's decent enough. But the offensive skill isn't as overwhelming as you'd like it to be, right?
Yeah, I think you're more familiar with Smith than I am, since you were the New Jersey team scout for a while with Dauber. But my rate's quite similar to yours. I think that a lot of it boils down to him having put all those eggs in the offense and skating baskets, and that it just hasn't quite been enough to cement his role in the NHL on its own.
Fully agreed. But moving on to two demotions, if you can call them that. First and foremost, Maveric Lamoureux, who was a first-round pick of the Arizona Coyotes, a towering 6'7" defenseman with fluid skating ability, has been sent to Drummondville for another year of development. By this point, a lot of scouts in the private sphere, especially, expected him to be kind of that NHL presence pretty much, a year or two after being drafted, given his frame, given his skating ability, is definitely NHL caliber. But my main concern with Maveric Lamoureux remains the same. I see a player who isn't good offensively enough in order to justify him, in order to balance out the defensive game that he has. I mean, he's really good defensively, makes good reads, closes gaps aggressively and quickly, but the hockey sense isn't high enough. The offensive game isn't polished enough. There's just so much to work with Lamoureux's game in order to make him a more complete defenseman that I see him more as developing into a specialist role. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think Maverick in my mind has always been that type of specialist. He's a very unique profile, right, in terms of his reach, his height, his strength, paired with that mobility. But yeah, I still have some doubts. I thought he played quite well as a D+1 in the Q, but a defenseman impressing in the QMJHL as a D+1 after he got drafted in the first round isn't exactly a standout thing.
Yeah, that's the minimum.
It's the baseline expectation for sure. And yeah, I think that a role where he's kind of just allowed to be that mobile, like massive defensive defenseman is probably where he would thrive the most, even though it'd be a more subtle and quiet role than you might expect from a first round drafted defenseman. But yeah, I think at this point, I'm not surprised that he got sent back down. And I didn't think that he was very polished in his draft year, and I definitely thought he needed a couple seasons to refine his game. But no, I think he's progressing fine for what he is. I think the problem is if the expectation from Lamoureux is to be that top four hulking Tyler Myers rookie year defenseman. You might be surprised that it's going to be closer to Tyler Myers now defenseman than anything else. So
absolutely,
as long as the expectations there are calibrated, I think it's fine. But I think a specialist on the bottom pair is the most realistic projection at this point in time.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's one more I want to mention that I'm a lot more okay with and a lot more in tune with, like what's good for this player, is Tobias Vin, who was a late round pick of the New Jersey Devils, I believe in the 6th round. a couple of years ago, and he's developed fairly well as a left-handed defenseman in the in Finland, and has revolutionized his game in ways I did not expect him to. He's become a much better breakout player, a much better offensive distributor, which I really didn't expect from him. I saw very much the kind of defenseman profile out of him in his draft year. So that took me kind of by surprise. And he's being sent down to the AHL with Utica in order to polish his game further. And I think that's the best thing for his game. He's going to be able to develop some key tools that will surround his budding playmaking ability and uplift his defensive game even more than it already is. I've always been impressed with his defensive gap control, his ability to man his own zone and clear the net front and all that. But if he can continue to develop that playmaking game, he could become a surprisingly good two-way defenseman at the NHL level. So I'll keep a close lookout for him as well. That wraps things up for our first segment, but still in the same tune, we'll continue talking about kind of demotions to junior leagues, that kind of stuff, with Andrew Cristall, who was sent back to Kelowna. We'll get right into that right after these messages from our sponsor. Our next partner is GameTime. GameTime is an awesome app that helps you get last-minute tickets at great deals. There are often some situations where I find myself with an afternoon free out of nowhere at the last minute, and I feel like going and watching a local game, whether that's the Montreal Canadiens or the Montreal Alouettes, or basically any team you're looking to see at the last minute. GameTime is a great option. Honestly, I've used them for the longest time, especially given that my schedule is so unpredictable, and sometimes within a 30 minutes notice, I've got my afternoon free and I'm able to go and watch a game. They've helped me out really well. They're obsessed with finding you the best deals as well. They have deals on ticket right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's really the place to get last minute seats. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, hockey, comedy, anything you want, they've got you covered. With zone deals, you can pick the section, and GameTime picks the seats for an average of 18% of savings. And the GameTime guarantee makes sure that you always get the best price. If you find a ticket in the same section and row for less than what you're seeing on GameTime, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out by buying tickets with GameTime. You can download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem the code. It's LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. You can download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You can also check them out at gametime.co. Check it out. All right, so moving on to Andrew Cristall, who was just recently sent down to the Kelowna Rockets by the Washington Capitals. A recent second-round pick in the 2023 NHL draft, was a highly touted player who slipped into the second round due to concerns about skating, physical play, stamina, and a lot more, especially the defensive side of the game. But offensively, he's just absolutely electric, and I'm a huge fan of his game. So I wanted to kind of dedicate a segment to him and what we expect from him, essentially, going back to Kelowna, how it's going to be for him. I believe he's lost his major kind of offensive contributor on his line in Gabriel Sturck, who was signed to an amateur tryout. But just want to really kind of delve into what we can expect from Cristall this year. He's going to be going back and playing with his former, his fellow draft eligible Caden Price. Do you expect the totals to go up? Do you expect him to kind of break out and prove everyone wrong, given that he was drafted in the second round and not the first, that kind of stuff? Or just a bit more of the same from Andrew Cristall this year? What do you expect?
I don't think that there's a D+1 player where the point totals matter less this season than Andrew Cristall.
Yeah.
Point production is never going to be the question in his game. If he goes and replicates the same point a game totals as last year or regresses, it doesn't really matter. This is a player who has tremendous and abundant skill, and the creativity is off the charts, and he processes the game at a lightning pace. The problem with him is, on the one hand, not resorting to pond hockey style of play, where he's basically just going all out, all on his own, improvising, and doing relatively well against the competition he's playing against. But that worked less and less the more that the WHL season went on last year, the more that opposing teams had a decently deep playbook on Andrew Cristall and how to defend him.
Yeah.
And I think this year the focus really should be on him developing NHL habits or professional habits in his game, whether that be being more controlled in possession and being a bit more patient with the puck rather than trying to force something with his own skill all the time, to use his teammates more effectively, to learn the give and go a bit better, because I think that would open up a ton of ice and a lot of opportunities for him to create offense if he's able to really learn the give and go as a reliable tool, more so than just going off like playing cowboy hockey all the time. And I think we'll have heard a lot of that from the Capital staff in training camp, and it's the reason that he fell in the draft. I think it's easier to build that foundation when you already have the elite skill and the other way around. So I'm hopeful that he will progress on that front. I wish he were with a better team this season to do so. I think it'd be easier in a stronger environment. But no, I think the expectation for him this season is just to grow his game in ways that aren't just production, but overall in terms of maturity and in terms of just valuing possession more consistently, taking some safe options sometimes, adding layers of deception into his skating. Working on the skating is a massive one that needs to progress. So as long as the skating is worked on and he learns some professional habits, I think it'll be a very successful D+1 season for him.
For sure, hopefully. I mean, we're talking about a player who, for me, has the best brain in this draft year outside of Connor Bedard.
Yeah, okay, good. You added the necessary asterisk at the end there.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's one player who outranks him, and even Connor Bedard himself called him the smartest player he's ever played with. I mean, you look at his game overall, and you can see the intelligence. It's a trust issue, and I feel like that's what was a lot of it in Kelowna. Just not trusting his teammates to deliver on the promises that he sets up for them. But essentially, you're looking at a player who, with enough time, with enough development, I feel can develop that side of his game really well, because he understands hockey at an instinctual level, and you rarely get that outside of the first round. And I look at what the Capitals did with that second round pick, and it's looking good. So I'll be very interested in seeing kind of how he progresses. But you're looking at his defensive game as a major weakness. Obviously, you're looking at his skating ability, especially, as something that really needs to be worked on, because I can only imagine what a high-end skating Andrew Cristall would do to the NHL, and it would not be pretty and safe for work. You're looking at a player who can genuinely make a difference without that skating ability already, with his high-end skill and hockey sense and processing. But if you add the pace of play and the speed, the straight line speed and the agility and the edge work that would make his body keep up with his mind, and it would just be a deadly combination. I don't think the Capitals should put too much emphasis on developing his defensive game, because you're taking time away from some vital things that could be worked on instead. I feel like that would be much better for his game. But I mean, I'm just really excited to see what happens with Cristall, because he's got a great opportunity to set himself up for long-term success at the NHL level, and I really want to be proven right on him. I put a lot of emphasis on how good he was, and he remained kind of a top 10 player for me throughout the year. I don't think I'm budging anywhere anytime soon on that. He's still one of the best players in terms of pure skill in this draft, arguably top 5 in the 2023 draft. So I'm excited. Would you still put him in that top 5 conversation? I mean, if you consider Andrew Cristall, and Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli, probably Leo Carlson in that mix. Michkov, Smith. Is he better than one of those 5? Yeah.
Yeah, I think he'd probably be the 5th name on my board in terms of pure skill.
Exactly.
Perhaps less so in the tools to support the skill, but yeah.
In terms of just the skill and isolation, for me, he's top 5. So there isn't really a conversation to be had here. I still think that Cristall has the potential in order to unlock so much more with some work on his skating, on his edge work, on his agility, on his top speed. You could be looking at a player who's going to be an electrifying part of that Washington Capitals top line for years to come if he's developed properly. But the flip side of that is that there's a possibility he doesn't make the NHL. And that's still a realistic possibility. And it's just that high risk element that kept him out of the first round, in my opinion. Like, the teams don't like to waste first-round picks on players who have a non-zero chance of not making the NHL. It's very rare. That's why we saw, the likes of, I'm blanking on his name, that Swedish defenseman who neither one of us likes, but got drafted really high.
Theo Lindstein.
Theo Lindstein. I think he was a first-round pick, right?
He was for St. Louis, yeah.
That's bad. Like I like him. He's going to be an NHLer. He's not going to be anything more than a bottom pair defenseman from what I've seen from him so far. He hasn't shown any indication that he's got any higher processing than what you would expect from a bottom pair guy. He's really good defensively. A very, very simple player. None of what he does is at all complex. But he went in the first round, and Andrew Cristall didn't. And that shows kind of what the mindset is at the NHL level in terms of scouting. A lot of guys are just looking to grab an NHLer and get out of there with them. And that could end up paying off really well for the Capitals with this risk. So I'm excited to see what happens there. But that wraps things up for our second segment. And we'll finish things off with our Game on the Line segment for the 2016 NHL Draft. We'll get into it right after these messages over at Locked On NHL Prospects.
Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, that you can use on anything ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and more. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so to close things off, we'll do our Game on the Line segment for the 2016 NHL Draft. There were some fairly easy selections here, and we pretty much have essentially the same team minus a player or two. So let's get started with our first line, which is the exact same. We both
showdown, Hadi. Which team's winning on the forwards here? You or me?
It's going to be tough.
Is it your trio or my trio, which consists of the exact same three players?
Yeah.
The big question to be asked here.
Exactly. So we'll get started with the 6th round pick on both of our lineups, which was a fairly easy one, even though we had to sacrifice the selection of Brendan Hagel. But you can't get around Jesper Bratt here at left wing. There's just no way we can sacrifice him to take anyone else in that round. Even though Brendan Hagel is a really good player, he's not Jesper Bratt, who is a fantastic complement to our center, which is the #1 overall pick, none other than Austin Matthews. This was an easy selection.
What?
A fairly easy selection, mainly because in Jesper Bratt, you've got pretty much the best complement I can think of to Austin Matthews. A fantastic playmaker. Yeah.
If he works with Marner, he's going to work with Bratt. I have no concerns there.
Exactly. They're really, really complementary players. And with Matthews, you're getting a game breaker who brings equal parts goal scoring ability and defensive game to the table. And you add on top of that the right wing that we both selected, Ross Colton, who I believe was a 5th rounder. Fourth rounder. In Ross Colton, you're getting another kind of defensive presence, but he can also man the forechecking and win pucks back. He can do the dirty work on that line. He kind of fills that Zach Hyman role on that line, which is perfect, really. I mean, this is a very complimentary and very effective line as a combination of skill sets, which is essentially what we're both looking for this line. Can you think of a better combination of players in terms of the guys in the 2016 draft? I mean, I feel like we nailed it on the head here, right?
I mean, I would have swapped out Colton for Hagel if I could have, and downgrade my 4th rounder to a 6th, but that's not how this thing is structured, sadly.
Exactly.
But it's basically right up my alley for what I'm looking for in a first line. I mean, I think that the Toronto blueprint of having a high energy, high octane offensive specialist be the complement to your elite sniper and your elite playmaker works very nicely.
Exactly.
And that Colton definitely fills that role in this line here.
Absolutely. Moving on to the defense, though, we took the same right-handed defenseman, which is pretty much the easiest pick you can make in this draft. We both took Adam Fox in the third round. We
Indeed.
know he slipped into the third for the sole and unique reason that he had made very clear from the start of the draft year that he was going to go and play with the New York Rangers and nothing was going to stop him. So the Calgary Flames chose to go for him, pick him, and then flip him to the Rangers eventually in a trade.
No, to Carolina first.
To Carolina, who then flipped into the
exactly.
Rangers.
Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, Adam Fox is, for me, the best defenseman in this draft. I don't think it's anywhere close. He is a fantastic puck mover. Every decision he makes is spot on. Is an elite decision. Nothing he does really leads to. Very rarely does any play he makes or any attempt that he makes lead to something bad. It's just every play he makes advances play, which is just it's the definition of an elite defenseman. The divergence comes here with who we paired with him, right? Because you went with it in a different direction than I did. I went with Vincent Desharnais of the Edmonton Oilers, who, I mean, in terms of defensemen overall, to complement Adam Fox, we did not have the best picks available to us, but I thought we could go. I went with Vincent Desharnais mainly because he's that big, towering defenseman presence. And even though Adam Fox
I also went with Vincent Desharnais because he's that big, tall defenseman presence. We also have the same backline here.
Oh, do we? Didn't we? Oh, shoot. Yeah, sorry. No. Let's restart. Because I went with Lajoie. I changed my mind with Lajoie.
Okay, okay. I
was reading off yours. My bad. See, that's why
no worries. I was like, I mean, sure, we just have identical lineups now. It's fine.
Essentially, yeah. I chose, the left-handed defense spot is where we kind of grow apart in terms of our thought process here. So you went with Vincent Desharnais, who is a big, towering defenseman presence, which complements Adam Fox fairly well. But I was thinking more along the lines of Adam Fox is already doing a lot of heavy lifting defensively. He's a very good gap controller. He clears a net front really well, switches assignments and understands his assignments really well in the defensive zone. I was looking for a player who would be able to assist him in breaking the puck out, and that would be really good at getting Adam Fox a puck in good areas. That is not Vincent Desharnais by any means. I mean, as much as I like his defensive game, Maxime Lajoie for me was the pick, mainly because I trust Lajoie more on the puck than Vincent Desharnais. And on the breakout, I like Adam Fox. He's not an elite skater. His brain does the heavy lifting for a lot of what he does. So you're looking for a player who's going to find him in open space and give him that space that he can't find on his own with his speed, with his footwork. So for me, this is a combination that I feel could work out better than Maxime Lajoie, just mainly because Carter Hart's really good at directing pucks into corners. Maxime Lajoie or Adam Fox can pick them up. They can play D-to-D and find each other in open space. You've got, Brad is going to assist on the breakout. Austin Matthews is going to carry the puck in. And Ross Colton is going to chase dump-ins if they occur. That combination of skill sets works really well. But speaking of goaltenders, I mean, I went with Carter Hart. You went in a different direction as well for your netminder. What's the difference for you between your goaltender and mine?
Recent success and consistency. I went with Phil Gustafsson, who I thought was one of the best goaltenders in the league last season, and very likely recency bias on this one. Carter Hart's been scaring me a bit the last couple seasons with how his play has progressed.
It's Philly. I mean,
it's for sure. It's Philly. Like, don't get me wrong, I get it.
They've got a curse with goalies, eh?
They do, and with Hart specifically, like the consistency he was demonstrating his first 2.5 seasons was so impressive, and then ever since then it's been the polar opposite, where it seems like on every night you don't know which Carter Hart you're getting. And Phil Gustafsson I thought was excellent in Ottawa when he was a backup, and I got some live viewings here with the Sens. And I always thought he was excellent. And then he gets traded to Minnesota. And wouldn't you know it, when you give him starting minutes, he looks great. And
Jared Spurgeon in front of him.
A bit of an upgrade defensively from Thomas Chabot to Jared Spurgeon there. But at the same time, Gustafsson's a goaltender who's really composed in net. I like the way that he manages his angles. He's always very centered in his net. Very strong puck tracker, does the simple things in the game really, really well as a goaltender. So I think the reason that I side with him here is that I thought he played a very strong and consistent season last year, and then he demonstrated the style of goaltending that makes it easy to project a continuation of that consistency moving forward.
For sure. My only concern is with, obviously it's Matthews versus Matthews in the center court, but I feel like Gustafsson's a lot better at absorbing pucks and retaining them. Whereas with a team like this, I feel like it would be better to play that open ice style where pucks are being redirected to corners and picked up, and play is ongoing as much as possible. And you have as little puck stoppages as possible. So I feel like, given the combination of Lajoie and Hart and how it would play out on the ice, I'm a tiny bit more confident in my lineup. But obviously, we've got 4 of the 6 same players, so it's really splitting hairs at this point. But I feel like, to compensate for Gustafsson's ability to absorb pucks and status and pad his save percentage with those shots that don't lead to high danger shots afterwards, you compare that with Carter Hart's consistent ability to put pucks in corners in ways that his defenseman can pick them up and play him out. I'd rather take the risk on that and have it pay off with more transition goals, because that's what this trio of players offensively would excel at, right? Especially with Adam Fox quarterbacking that. It's just breakout pass, carry the puck in the zone, back and forth, give and go, score. And that over and over again. I'm not as confident with Brad Matthews Colton on the cycle as I am with them on the rush, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. I think at this point, I wanted to go with the goaltender that has shown recent consistency and success, because the last thing I want in a Game 7 Stanley Cup final overtime is an inconsistent goaltender. I'm not going for stylistic fits in the lineup on that front. I'm going with the goaltender that I think is going to save me a puck when I really need it saved. So I went with Gustafsson over Hart for that reason.
Makes sense for sure. But let us know down below which of these 2 lineups would win. And this has been it for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you like what you've been watching, make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports. And make sure to tune in for our next episode as we continue our Game of the Line segment and look at a couple more things here. So this has been Hadi Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.